Welcome back to Walk with TFB. Tim Bryson here, and as y'all know, I'm a Black millennial who is eager to have unfiltered conversation with authentic people centered on international education, global sport, and Black culture. This guest that we have today, man, if y'all seen the photo, y'all already know who it is. If you've seen the name, I know you recognize it, especially in the college sports space. But this is someone who has become definitely a friend, but has become a sister over the last several years. Someone who I genuinely respect and love learning alongside in many different capacities. To the point, and to keep it a bug with y'all, I purposely did not take any formal notes, which I rarely do, both on the podcast and in class, but did not take any formal notes because I know this conversation is going to be genuinely authentic and going to help us all learn more about international athletes and staff in U.S. higher education. But without further ado, y'all help me welcome future Dr. Ancia. What's popping, homie?
Hey Tim, how are you? Thank you for having me. Appreciate
Man,
it.
you know, like this is a must. When I had the theme for the season, I'm like, I gotta pull you on the pod for a number of different reasons.
Absolutely.
But especially your research and your lived experience here, which we'll get to. But as you know how things go, man, segment one is all about storytelling. And I actually don't know this. So I'm actually very curious myself. So Ancia, what's your story, yo?
You know what's funny? I try not to talk about this as much as I possibly can. But all right, so hi everyone. I was born and raised in Barbados. I was fortunate enough to play tennis. My dad loved tennis so much, and he was like, "Hey, you could become the next Serena Williams." So that was the thing. So I started playing, represented Barbados at numerous times, Fed Cup, Pan African American Games, a few things back then. Then went to IMG Academies, spent a year there, trained under the best of the best. Was walking around with, got to see Serena walking around, all the top pros, athletes. I was at IMG for a year and a half.
What?
Then I was lucky enough to get a tennis scholarship, a full tennis scholarship. I went to Bethune-Cookman University, did my undergrad there, international business. While I was there, SAC president, then got elevated to the MEAC SAC president. So that was where my leadership skills started. Captaining my team in the year we won our conference championship. So those was just my college highlights. Then after that, I had a passion for just looking to serve student athletes, and then I went into my master's degree, which is now my master's in counseling psychology, also from Bethune-Cookman University. Then obviously, every master's degree you have to do like an internship, practicum hours. So I didn't want to go the traditional case management route. And then, so fortunately back then, obviously I always pay respect and give Jacket. That's one of my big things. So Dr. Ernest Fingers, he was a director for student athlete success at Bethune-Cookman then. I started work with him. He trained me under him, and I had a passion for becoming a learning specialist, to
Mm.
help student athletes with learning disabilities. Went that route, started working there, went to Savannah State for a couple months, then went to Florida A&M for a year and a half, and then now I'm at Louisville as the associate director for academic services. So yeah, so that's kind of like a quick, what was that, 30, maybe 35 seconds of what my past was like before started doing this. And then again, we all know how this work started with the tweet from ESPN and with NIL, with everything, with all, yes, let's have all
Mm-hmm.
domestic, all athletes being included with NIL. And then obviously we knew how you and I had this conversation on Twitter. We knew that it was just a general broad statement where people were being excluded from that sense of inclusion. And then obviously I'm big on advocating. Obviously everyone tells like you talk too much and you don't speak about the right things, or you say too much and blah blah blah. But I feel like if you are in a space of when you have the opportunity to speak and become an ally into a situation, like for me as being a former international student athlete, and obviously I'm black, identifying as black, so for me, I wanted to be of service after 2020, to those students who would probably not have a voice. And obviously,
Mm-hmm.
some of those students are scared to speak about their experiences, but I've lived it. I've been here. And yeah, so just trying to be an advocate for that group of people who are everyone, in our uh, PhD programs, everyone's like 20,000 international kids, but I promise you the numbers are way more than that at this point in time. So I would love for NCAA to update their research process on the international staff, students.
That is that is a great point. I think you might be right. You might be up to 25, 30,000 at this point.
At least. Yeah.
Which would be we're gonna come to that. Let me not forget this point because you mentioned you played you represented Barbados, right? You said Pan American Games. What's the other one?
Federation Cup, so the Fed Cup, which is like the Davis Cup, women's cup for the Davis Cup.
Got it in Fed Cup. So the winner of those tournaments, would that make you the world champion? Or that make you?
I know that's how like yeah, that's how I go. You become a world champion after that. But yeah, Fed Cup was
I'm
fun.
trolling.
I played Monica Pugh. If anyone knew Monica Pugh, she's like this was like
Yeah,
the gold medalist back then. When she won gold, Monica Pugh from Puerto Rico. So I played her in the
yeah.
first round of the Fed Cup in Puerto Rico. Her whole family, crowd,
It was
everything was out
there.
there. So that was like nerve wracking. But fun times, fun times.
And then speaking to your IMG Academy experience, how were you introduced to, I guess, one IMG Academy, but then two, even the idea or opportunity to come to the States to compete as a student and an athlete?
So there's a international tennis federation, the ITFs are played
Yep.
globally, so they're different grades. So I think I'm probably far off and removed from tennis knowledge right now. So I think Barbados is a grade 3 or grade 4 in the tournament scales. So every year they host the ITF there in Barbados. So then obviously IMG Academy will send a group of kids down. My dad just was just talking to the representative and then like, hey, what's the opportunities here? Blah blah blah. And then he's like, well, you can potentially, look at because back then, like in Ireland, school is the most important thing. Like sport is it's a
Mm-hmm.
different like planning. So like school's your focus, sport is second. Like here, sport is first, school's kind of take a second,
Awesome.
a back seat. So there, my mom was
Mm-hmm.
like, "Well, you got to finish your schoolwork. I don't care what tennis you want to play, but school comes first." So, my dad was like, "Well, IMG, you can graduate high school at 16 in Ireland." So I had a year back then. There was a year gap, not the 6 months. So I had the year gap, and my dad was like, "Well, you already finished high school. Why not go to IMG? Spend a year there getting better, getting where you need to be at." And then
Wow.
the coach at Bethune, he just had a tournament there, and then he watched me play, and then got my scholarship, and then that was it. So that's how I got
Dang.
introduced to IMG college sports. It's just that there were one or two people who went to college from Barbados, but it wasn't like a mass, exodus of people. So like you would hear one-off stories. Then I remember the guy at IMG was like, "Well, Bethune-Cookman has a great band. Like they're one of the best bands in the country." And I was like, I didn't know nothing about the HBCU. I didn't
Yeah.
know nothing. Like I'm telling you right now, all I knew was I could play tennis. That's all I wanted to do. My focus from I was 5 years old up until when your brain starts to make sense of stuff, it was just playing tennis. So I'm hitting tennis balls, and all I was doing was playing tennis. I had no idea what a PWI was, a HBCU was, a mid major was. I didn't know none of that. I was just here to play tennis, and I got a scholarship. So,
Dang.
um, first game was a Thursday night game at Bethune-Cookman, and the band was great. So I was like, I'm definitely staying here. But yeah,
That's
so that's how I
dope,
got the
yo.
introduction into college athletics in a sense. Yeah.
And so then a similar way, right? You just mentioned that the recruitment, really selection process for international athletes is all over the place. But most of the time it goes through a coach, right? But when you
Mhm.
step foot on campus or realize like what this HBCU experience was, like take us back to like what your experience was when you first got on campus. And then obviously
Man,
reflecting back now as a two-time
all
alum.
right. I'm just saying the HBCU culture is different. It was fun. Embracement, they embraced you
Mm.
because obviously in Florida, so obviously more cultural differences and
Mm-hmm.
cultural integration. But just being on the campus, it just felt different. Like I was like, oh, this is like okay, all right. The football games that was new to me. But then I think
Mm.
I had just watched one Saints game, so I didn't know anything about American football. And then I picked Drew Brees as my team because he was just the best quarterback I saw back then. But just having that knowledge of just the campus climate and the culture, and I was like, okay. Then my classes got better. Then we started meeting the athletic staff, the AD. I remember when I walked through the door, Lynn Thompson, the AD, met me at the door when I first walked in, and that gave me a little sense of comfortability because how hardly do you see an AD greet kids outside of like that first week? Like literally when I walked through the athletic doors, Lynn Thompson was like, "Hey, I'm Lynn Thompson," but then I was looking for the compliance there, so I was like, "Are you the compliance?" And he's like, "No," and I didn't know who the AD was. So lack of knowledge of college
Wow.
athletics. Just walked up like, "Are you the compliance person?" He's like, "No, I'm the athletic director." I was like, "My bad." But
Mm-hmm.
just having that comfortability when walking on campus, and then the SW were there, then everyone was very, very welcoming and embracing when I stepped foot on campus, and then the culture was just different. Just the HBCU culture.
Super dope. So I'm gonna take this segment too. I think it's a perfect transition because I know, and I think people forget about this, but I hope me and Ahmad did you honored you well. But Black Student Athlete 2022, we presented, well, obviously unable to come, but presented on Black international athletes. And the one thing that you've been very loud and explicit about in all spaces is how we need to better consider the racialized experience of international athletes. And oftentimes this conversation about race and racism in the United States is very different and very new from athletes coming from all over the world. So
Absolutely.
can you just talk more about like one, like why is that? And that sounds rhetorical, but again, for the people tuning in, they may not be aware of this. But
Mm.
why is having conversation? We'll start here. Why is having conversation about race and racism, especially for um, Black international athletes in the U.S., is so important to include in their orientation and ongoing transition into U.S. higher education?
It's just that awareness piece. That's all it is, the awareness. You don't have to paint the perfect picture. You don't have to make things look amazing, but just having the cultural understanding of the differences in the US. Here again, I believe that unless you're in the space, you don't fully understand things that happen. So an international student who's coming to the US, their focus is, I'm here to play the sport. I have an opportunity to do
Mm-hmm.
this, boom, boom, boom. So just like our
Mm-hmm.
domestic student athletes who experience these things, imagine someone who's coming to a foreign country, no idea of what happens, no knowledge. Because yes, there are reports of what happens in the US, but no, like outside of the US, but you're not going to get the same news coverage that you're going to get while you're
Mm-hmm.
here.
Yep.
And then like, what recently just happened a couple of days ago, you have to look at that too. So now if I'm a student, I'm seeing that on the same thing with a domestic student. If I'm seeing something happen in the city, I might not want to go there, but some international kids don't have that same opportunity to say, hey, well, I can switch schools now that I saw something happen. They don't see what happens there. They don't see anything online. Yes, we have new updated technology and stuff like that, but when you go online and look at a university, they're advocating their best picture, their best model. They're
Mm-hmm.
not showing you what happens in the city. They're not showing you what's 10 minutes down the street. So giving the international students a better understanding of what they're coming into can give them a better hope of like, hey, this might be the place for me. This might be the fit for me. Because we all know what coaches do. Hey, come to me. I'm the best. I'm the best one for you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the best person for you. Then they get that the kids are like, yeah, this isn't what we discussed. This is not what we planned. So just having that cultural awareness, it goes back to the awareness piece of just what happens so that they can have a sense of understanding. They don't have to fully understand, but give them a piece that really don't feel completely shell shocked or completely
Mm-hmm.
alone in the space. Because one, they're adapting to a new team, a new coaching style, a new living experience, a new university, a new academic system. So, and then on top of that, now we have these conference realignments, and don't forget, international students have to be in 3 in-person classes, and then the domestic kids can take fully online. So now who's getting I like to say the short end of the stick right now?
Okay.
With
Yep.
the conference alignments. Again, another strategic decision being made. Well, it's not including all of the factors that affect all of our student athletes because we're only pinpointing on what we look at as the business side of the deals or
Mm.
whatever it is. Yeah.
This is good. As you're talking, right? One thing I'm thinking about is like, especially because I talk about the ongoing transition of international athletes, because it's not just when they first, land in the U.S.
Mhm.
And conversation about DEI, work, and anti-racism, sure, it took a bump or a spike after during 2020. But college athletic departments in particular, still, in my personal opinion, scared to really have deep, intentional, deliberate conversations about what's happening in the United States. And so as I'm thinking about, helping international athlete orient or become more familiar with U.S. higher education, at what point do we have these conversations, right? At what point do we introduce it, to them to be like, yo, here's maybe some history about the U.S. Here's like the U.S. is very racialized. Like we know that, especially people who've been here and or were born here. But at what point do you think personally, right? Again, I don't think there's any right or wrong answer, but
Yeah.
do we introduce this into their experience to help them make more meaning of what's going on around them?
Great question. Honestly, a great question. Absolutely great question. So that comes down from the handler, the person who should be in charge of like your recruitment. Like if you're going to
Mm-hmm.
really recruit these kids and recruit them and tell them, hey, I'm the best. Why are we not giving them the full picture? Why are we only giving them the picture that paint us look the best? For
Yep.
me, if I'm coming here, I'm looking for the person who is real to me that I can connect with, who's being truthful. Like as much as you want these kids to recruit, at the end of the day, it's their lives. The same thing with the NFL when you're cutting players, like you're cutting their lives, their families. That's affecting all of them. So then when you have
Mm-hmm.
these students who are coming from different countries, and they have like, oh, they think the US is like the Hollywood sign. That's the nice shiny picture. But then when you get into certain states, it's dry and there are only trees. So then your whole mental cognitive perceptions already changed. So now how do you now get back focused on the sport that you love? How do you now transition into something your mind was set on one thing, you set foot here and the coaches tell you something completely different, then you're like, oh my God, well, did I make the best decision for my life? And then make a good decision for me. And then some of those international kids can't transfer because it
Mm-hmm.
isn't it's a difference in terms of affecting them. So they don't have the option just to be, oh, I'm just gonna leave and I'm gonna go to a new school. Then that's why now you're looking at retention numbers of where they go back home the first chance and they get. And that's everyone's prerogative to leave and go back. But if you're trying to really like help your domestic kids learn different cultures, your international kids are just as important as your domestic kids in terms of being on your teams and integration of your teams and your cultural differences. Like, yes, some coaches might, hey, these things happen in different countries. Like the same like advisory put for different countries. These
Mm-hmm.
same advisories can be used in these sense to educate and be better? And then does that fall on the governing body? Does that fall on the university's intake? Does that fall on the athletic departmental body? So then what are we doing with the international students on campus? How are we training? How are we making their experiences the same? And then what are we doing? Because we have an international orientation for
Yep.
international students, then we don't model that same practice in athletics. And then you have international staff as professors, and then you don't have international staff in your athletic department, because then representation really matters if you don't have the holistic approach to what you're trying to get to. Don't get me on the soapbox right now, but we can go wherever on this.
No, this is your podcast, yo. But before we get into this international staff piece, I want to make sure that we also center the work that you're doing as a doc student, as a PhD student at Louisville. And I think what we've seen over the last probably 3 or 4 years now, and I'm thinking about myself, yourself, Raquel, Dr. Ash, Shay at NCAA, right? People have taken more collective approach, though small in team, but collective approach, and saying international athletes are here. And because they're here, we know there's more than 20,000. We need to do more to support them in their experience. I think I've taken this more career route, I think just given how I was introduced to the population. But you have taken, but again, from both lived experience and work, focusing on Black international athletes, which is a huge gap in literature, huge hole in support, huge misunderstanding and trying to conflate the two. Because the question I think I asked it on Twitter, I'm like, everyone already has these damn Black athlete affinity groups. Are there Black internationals in this group? Y'all, is it global? Like what? Talk more about. Yeah, I see you shaking your head. So the floor is yours. Go ahead.
So again, it goes back to the awareness piece. Like you have everyone does these advocacies, and some of the conferences go to DC and Montgomery, and then that's your key now to then educate your international students about your culture here. So then when you're lacking from bringing them in, including them into your groups, and then not necessarily like not making them force themselves into, but welcome them into these groups so they can have a better understanding, because then that will assist with your retention numbers. Because if they don't have an understanding of what goes on, then I'm not going to want to be a part of a group if I'm not sure what the group is going to be about for me. So then if your Black activist groups, are they welcoming your international students' perspectives? Are they hearing from the Black international student obviously what their perception of how they can be inclusive into helping and being an ally? Because again, the numbers are the same if you have an ally with you. The Black international students can be your ally in terms of fighting that injustice or fighting that advocacy that you need for Black student athlete activism. And then it goes back to again just the structure, the org structure, the internal structure. What are the affinity groups doing? If you're into, like, again, Black History Month come, we've had 1,000 athletes, pro athletes, but you have Black History Month, and then what are you incorporating? What's your message and what's your knowledge? Are we just repeating the same tweets, the same quotes, the same this? Then how are we getting new information? How are we bringing new awareness to groups and to situations? Yes, it is uncomfortable. The conversation is hard. No one likes to have it, but at some point in time, the difficult conversations are what are going to help us propel forward as a society. And I think when we start to integrate and stop looking at, this person is different, this person has this, knowledge is knowledge regardless of what your color, your skin, your race, your whatever you look like. But at some point in time, 20,000 international student athletes, Black international student athletes, a smaller population that hasn't been studied, as you said. There's minimal research on their experience. And again, you have students from the West Indies who come here. You have students from predominantly white countries who identify as Black who come here. So at some point in time, is it a small group? But why are we making it small? Because we've subjected it, we've pushed the group aside. No one's even bothered to even remotely think about the group to add into the international student experience. And then obviously the experience is different because you're Black. Like, let's be real, like, you're Black. So your experience is gonna be different from white European students' experiences coming to the US. And then where do you fit in that group? Because where do you identify as? Like, you have all these affinity groups for your student athletes. Then the international kid who is Black, do they go into the international group? Do they go into the Black group? Or do they just stay by themselves? Which do they pick now? And then if your schools don't have groups or anything that's going to fit them to fit in, I'm not going to do anything. Because at this point in time, you haven't opened the door for me to do anything outside of my sport. You haven't said, hey, would you like to join this group? Hey, can I welcome you to this organization? But we do all of that on campus. The campus makes sure that the international students are well taken care of. Like, they have welcome back stuff. They have all these things for their students. But in athletics, you can say, hey, you're just here to play a sport, and you should be happy that you're in the US. Blah, blah, blah. Yes, everyone's mindset isn't like that. But I know we have people who think like that, even people in our college athletic spaces. And that's why 20,000, how many research papers have you read that says 20,000 international kids? And every year, I'm looking at the date, it was 20,000 when I started my PhD program. So you're trying to tell me from 2019 to now, no one has actually updated this system and said it might actually be more than 20,000 because we keep quoting the same number over and over and over. And that's the thing with academia and research because we have to hit the quota. But are we really doing meaningful work when we just keep hitting the quota of 20,000? There are way more than 20,000 international student athletes here. And then we go into NIL, the lack of that. So then here we are now with a cycle again.
I think so. I think it went from 20,000 in like 2019, 2020, and now it's 20,000 plus.
Oh yeah, they
Like
had the plus on there. Yeah, that's
the
the
pluses.
APA format. Yeah. So now we're like, okay, are we actually representing this population? And then again, the people who study the international population are just only talking to people who are experiencing it. They actually aren't the people who actually lived it to actually give a real your personality statement to actually really correlate to what the study has to be about. And unfortunately, that's academia, and then that's college athletics, and then when the two combine, it's like boom. So
We're getting warmed up. We're getting warmed up. And so you mentioned academia several times. Like I said, this is not just your lived experience, but the work that you're doing in your doc program. So what have you learned alongside your lived experiences about Black international athletes in the U.S.? Or what are you learning? Probably a better question.
For me, I take myself out of it because I do. Obviously, you said I've lived that experience, so I am trying to because my experience was back in 2015, 2011 to 2016. So now times have changed. So now I'm trying to really hear those voices of the current ones in terms of like this post 2020 climate. So hearing those experiences of what we need to do better, and then actually putting those practices into place because we can do all the research, all of the talking, all of the documentation, but when is the action going to really correlate with the theory and what we're practicing in terms of making the departments more student friendly in the sense of where the international kids are feeling, you know what, they actually do see me. I am valued. But again, some people don't hear your internationalness until you speak. Your accent doesn't come out until you speak. That's when they know you're not from here. So at that point in time, where do you fit into that societal differences? Like where do you fit? What identity do you identify as? Where's your comfortability with in terms of like knowing where to fit in with when it comes to like your identity? And then academia on top of that is like, well, for me, like they say, like, West Indian student athletes, you don't consider them West Indian, in terms of like you're black. So like the Caribbean, I can't call them Caribbean. They're gonna look at me like we don't consider ourselves Caribbean, we black. Like so at some point in time it's like, are we using the right terminology in academia to really hone in on our points and get across on what we're trying to really go? Because if I'm black again, I'm black and I'm international. If I'm reading something and someone's calling me a Caribbean, I'm gonna shut the paper because it's not relating to me as a person. And that's where academia lacks in terms of our forefront is like we do all these lived experience and all these phenomenal studies, but we don't actually hone in on the action to then better these next studies. Because you're gonna hear the same information over and over and over and over and over.
Very
You know,
true. Listen, this is your podcast. I just get to facilitate.
right.
But before I jump to this next point, how do you want to use your research to influence the work? Right, like what is the end goal?
Everything for me is education. If I have the platform to educate and make a human being and develop a human and make sure that the next person behind me, I always say, you teach a man how to fish, you can feed a whole bunch of people. You just get the man to fish when you feed him that one time. So my professional and PhD journey and PhD goal is just to educate where I can and plugging those areas of gaps in the research to where I'm bettering the person who wants to do a study off of mine, who I'm bettering the next person behind me. I'm bettering the next generation. Because at the end of the day, if you don't educate the generation now about what's happening here and what's happening now, then how are they going to better the next step for the next person? So for me, I already have my time. I've played my tennis. I've had my championship ring. My knees hurt every single day, but I lived a great life in terms of playing my sport. But my job here and how I see it, my mission, and I look up as my God's conference call is to educate about this unserved and unrepresented population within college athletics and within academia and higher education.
My God's conference call is dope. I like that. I like that a lot. That's
Absolutely.
good.
Yeah. That's it
That's
with God,
good.
man.
That's good. So I want to take us a little bit down the road, right? You talk about Black international athletes. So we're talking about that right now, which is intersectionality and intersecting identities on a number of different levels. And the one thing, this might get me hot or on my soapbox, is that we don't do a good job supporting our Black athletes in their career readiness. We definitely don't do a good job supporting our international athletes and career pathways in the U.S., home country or third country. But then you Black and you international,
Mm-hmm.
What the F is
Oh, you
going
getting the
on?
short.
So
Oh,
come on now. So what I'm talking about here, particularly though, is that we could talk about returning home or a third country, which is a whole different preparation process, right? Which we probably may get to. But in the United
mm-hmm.
States, there is a pathway, right, through OPT, H-1B, and understanding that there's some organizations, some nonprofit organizations that are CAP exempt. And higher
Mm-hmm.
education, college athletics is one of those. So
Mm-hmm.
for those who may not be aware, can you just talk more from, again, your both lived experiences and what you know about that process? What is that process like? Before we jump into like why are there not more international staff in athletics, especially given to what you mentioned earlier, if we want to have a staff population that's reflective of the diversity of our athlete population, we need more internationals on our staff. So what is that process, that OPT H-1B process, and help us learn more about what CAP exempt means as opposed to being put in a lottery.
Yeah. As you said, higher education falls on the CAP, the exempt. So the OPT is a 1 year working experience. It gives you 1 year to, kind of figure out what you would like to do if you would like to, be a professional in a certain field. It gives you a 1 year experience. And after that, you have the option to find an employer who would like to sponsor you in terms of your H-1B, which is like your working visa. Obviously there are requirements and there are things that would restrict for what that visa can do and can hold. So I would urge anyone to can read what's on the USCIS website to get more information on that. But those processes are different. They take a long time, and then obviously, you have to find an employer who's willing to take that chance on you. So there are multiple former college athletes who would love to give backup service to international students, but then again, that now takes a chance of the universities having to take that chance to invest in that person. Like if you're thinking this person the best person for your department, then it's an investment. The same way how we invest in coaches, you give coaches a contract and you tell them, hey, we need you to win something within 4 or 5 years. It's the same thing when you do with anyone else. With ADs, like, hey, we give you a contract, we need a winning season by X, Y, and Z. So look at the international staff as your investment to your international student athletes. Again, is a troubling policy because it's different, along with whatever the immigration rules and laws and regulations are. But again, and some people might get upset what I'm about to say, but universities have the money to hire international professors. You have the money to go recruit and go across the country and take your teams to play pro sports and going to other countries and blah 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 blah. So the notion that it is too hard, we don't have the money. My silence would be what my next words would have been going to be. So again, there are excuses and then there are people who want to be about action. So if you are an AD or someone, you're really honing in on your student athlete, look around your athlete department, you have international students, which means at some point in time, you should have international staff, at least one person in your office, whether the trainer, someone that someone can feel connected to, who understands what they're going through. You don't have to be from the same country, but there's a general understanding of being an international student. So then that now takes a chance of someone needing to take the risk or take or to make it an investment. Like look at it as an investment to your department. Like that's a different perspective person that falls on your DEI lens. Then your student athletes may feel a little bit more included, and that can assist with your international retention numbers.
I think the point you mentioned about investment is one that want to make sure that we stamp, as part of this episode for a number of different reasons. Because I think from an investment standpoint, the investment is not just international athlete development, but then also centering global education, international education as a priority for your athletic department, which is, that you just mentioned, should be a part of everyone's DEI strategic plan. Let's just give, especially as part of a higher education enterprise. But number two, one thing you mentioned, right? International staff could certainly help, support the international athletes on our campus. But we also know, again, going back to 2020, the starters of Black Lives Matter, requiring and placing the burden of doing international athlete development work on your one international athlete or international staff member is ludicrous and quite honestly asinine. And so how can we, and you're the expert, right? And I say expert on purpose because, again, it's your lived experience, but how can athletic departments take a more collective responsibility, accountability type of approach to embracing international education and supporting international athletes as core to what they do, and not placing it on Ancia or not placing it on the former Tayhawk or not placing it on someone else who's understaffed?
Honestly, your research, man, like what you do, them taking teams, to different countries for tournaments. That's where it starts from, because then you have a understanding of when you take these teams to the Bahamas to play, you might see a Bahamian athlete just there. Hey, you know what? University of something came to my country. I might want to go to college in the U.S. Like the Africa Basketball Association, like doing all that. How the SEC is now trying to plug into Mexico, like just doing those different things and seeing those that education piece, going into different countries and bringing that back. So like that's why I'm like, Tim, is you're right on the money with your stuff, because you're like one of the few people who are challenging the notion that college athletics can't go global, because college sports don't play outside of the U.S. Like, I mean, they're Olympic sports because they play in different countries, but college sports itself is not global. But you have international students coming here for global entry. So then, why haven't we not made the crossover? And that's the biggest question.
I'm glad you brought this up, yo, because one thing I'm thinking about, I don't know if you saw Noah Lyles' comments at World Championships, the track athlete. As I'm thinking, I'm gonna tweet this out prior to this, but like,
this morning,
does that make I forget who won last year? Does that make the LSU women's basketball team the world champions? That doesn't. It's the National Basketball or National Collegiate Athletic Association. But
in the World Series,
it's just like I said, it's asinine, bro. Like, if people in their feelings about it, but I think someone had quote tweeted like I think it's a definition earlier, and it's talking about American exceptionalism, and that because we're American.
Oh, absolutely.
Which I think goes back in some of the practices, both from a DEI standpoint, athlete development standpoint, that at least that I'm seeing, you've experienced and have seen as well. But the one thing is, you're talking about, this college sport piece, and which I think is crucial. And I hope with both you and Ash and again Raquel, some other people I've met over the years, stay in the United States for as long as y'all possibly want to. Right? If you want to go home or go somewhere else, I'll come visit. But as long as you want to be here, I want you here. Because just as we saw with Black athletes in particular, even LGBTQ identifying athletes in 2020 and since then, it's taking something bad for athletic departments to be like, you know what, we should probably do better here. And so I'm trying to get ahead of this and be like, yo, like, I'm telling us we need to do better. You have said we needed to be better
before the big thing happens, but they don't want to listen. They don't want to listen. They don't want to hear us. They don't want to hear us, because at some point in time, we're always reactive. In college athletics, we always react to the big thing that happened. We all got to scramble now and fix this up. But why not put these things into place so we won't have to have all these scrambling and fixing things into place? But that's why the folks at the big top made more money. That's why we're here. So I'm
trying to listen, bro. And I'm trying
because what's going to happen? What's going to happen. Something's going to happen with the international student. Is either going to happen with NIL, and that's going to be a caveat. Something big is going to transpire. Then it's all going to be scrambling. Oh, we need to have more inclusion. We need to do more education. We need to make sure that we understand international student athletes' perspective, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, here we are giving it to them on a silver platter, and no one wants to eat, sleep, or drink about it. So we'll keep being education people until the big thing happens, and then answer the phone when the big thing happens.
Hey, they're gonna call you. They're gonna call you. Well, I think they're gonna call you starting next year when Big 12 goes to Mexico. I think other conferences are gonna say, you know what, this actually is working.
Gotta do it too.
And I'm trying to do it too. I think we just saw with Notre Dame playing Navy in Ireland. They said 80,000 Americans traveled over there.
Absolutely. I
think it was 80 or 60. Like,
yeah,
what
about that? Yeah.
So my question, and I'm going to that game, as in Paris, the South Carolina Notre Dame game. But I'm like, imagine if Alabama played like USC in Rome. Why would y'all not think there would be interest?
Absolutely.
And we've seen you're a big global. I call it global football now. I'm trying to be better with my language, but
with the football,
yeah, global football. But you see like global football with the American tours they be doing. It's on purpose, right?
Absolutely.
They're packing out 90,000, 100,000. So why could there not be? We done team tour, but why could there not be kickoffs in other countries? I don't see why that's out of the realm of possibility.
Sport is global. Sport is global. Sport is global. Man. Sport is our global connection. It's a thing that keeps us all together. And college athletics is a multi-million-dollar industry. Even if it's not even if it's only played in the US, is watched. People watch it across the world. It is seen across the world. And until we decide that we're gonna use sport is really our connection. Look at the World Cup. Look at FIFA, the World Cup, man. Like everyone's always happy. They're together. Like it brings everyone together. Imagine that same atmosphere for a college football game. I just said with like USC playing Michigan or something big of that state. Like like it's a different atmosphere, a different feeling. Like I know for sure when I watched Manchester United play here, I was like, this is cool. Like imagine me being able to just travel to, I just said like Rome or France to see to see some tennis players play, to see some football players play, you know, like women's soccer, something around those lines to really
Mm.
like, and then that will enhance the international traffic with the sport because then now you won't have to just only utilize your alumni to then go back and talk about how great the university is. I can see it for myself. I don't have to hear any word of mouth. I saw y'all play in my country. I'm definitely going to school at that
I'm just,
school. Like
again, it makes too much sense, yo. I didn't even think about
it's
tennis
too
in that
smart.
way.
It's too smart. It's too
Because
smart.
it's too smart, bro. But I think the
It's too
last
easy.
thing I'll
That's why.
say, but this is what I wanted to happen, honestly. And I've been waiting on whether it be a group of five school or Division II school, they deliberately invest in like global partnerships, exchange with a non-US country, whether it be global south, and or over in Europe or somewhere. And they build up a fan base and an affinity in that area to where the top international athletes from that country or continent are starting to go to, I don't know, like Kenyon College or Coastal Carolina or Bethune-Cookman. And then Bethune is like the
Absolutely.
D2, the D1 powerhouse in whatever sports. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
No,
so I'll
yeah.
be like, wait, how did they get this talent?
Get
I
it.
don't know, because I,
We have
but
the
again,
connection with the university. And then you can turn that into world games. And then we can talk about the world games, world college games. So here we are with a futuristic planning in place, and we've got to be 10 paces behind the eight ball. So again, I've been where you are. I've proposed this to a lot of people. We can definitely connect with the University of London, the University of
mm-hmm.
this. You have a partnership with let's use Michigan and University of Manchester. They have a connection. Your athletes that play there, boom, 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 boom. Then at the end of the time you have a world game, so you have the World Cup, you have a World College Sports game, and you play them in different countries and whatever teams they want to be at. Because you have the money to send these kids to different countries. You have the money to
Mm-hmm.
send your coaches to go recruit. So college athletics has the business and the opportunity to really go global and push global sport to where it's a connection piece of the cross culture. Where it's not just one hand being serviced. Everyone is getting something out of it because that's where it goes next. Because I don't think you see, but a couple of years ago there were a few jobs on the NCAA job market with like universities in London because now they're looking to hit college sports. They're looking now to add sport towards their education pieces. As I said, in some countries, school and being a scholar is a forefront than being an athlete. So now, if you have a university in the UK trying to push for sporting now, then that gives you the opportunity. They're now seeing the buy-in from heavy global sport. So now, how do you now bring like college football? Maybe bring a little basketball, lacrosse. Those sports that are played heavily in the US, send those over to different countries, introduce them to colleges, connect with those universities in different countries, and then hey, well, you can study abroad at our partner university for 2 years. You can still play your high caliber sport and you can still get a study abroad experience. But again, I'm at the bottom. I can sit right here, Tim.
We gotta talk more about this. I'm gonna connect you to my homie over in the UK because she's actually doing this. And I'm not gonna take she's gonna be on the podcast. Don't worry.
I've already said it. You do that connection with the universities from the different schools, and you don't have to send the kids there for a year. You send them, hey, for your spring semester, you go to University of Auckland, and you get to play field hockey for your semester, and you have to your semester study abroad. But we're still limiting ourselves to just having SEC conferences fly from 25,000 miles away and then have these international kids suffer because they have to take 3 in-person classes and then they have to go to class. But we haven't
Yep.
talked about that because which coach was it that said we need to have more online programs a few days ago? One of the football coaches from the university said you need to have more online programs. So then how's that going to affect your international student who can't have a fully online program? Again, we're making decisions and then we're trying to string everyone along and then some people are going to fall off the wayside and they're not going to get service. And if the route that we keep going, we're not going to have international students wanting to come because no kid wants is already flying over here. I don't want to fly from California to Washington to play to play my sports. And
Mm-hmm.
then why would I go to school in the US if it's not going to help me in a sense? Like, and think about your more caliber. Like football is now starting to bring Australian kickers, kickers from New Zealand. So as much as you don't want your international population, it's happening with or without you thinking about it.
Oh, buddy, we're gonna talk more about
We
this.
got
I think
time.
this it's bigger than the NCAA for
Oh, for
sure.
sure.
And
Absolutely.
I think and I know these mega events between the World Cups and then LA 28, it's gonna be a boom that we can definitely facilitate, which we'll talk more offline.
Absolutely.
But segment three, as we round this episode out, phenomenal episode again, one of the ones I was most excited about this season for this very reason. Because we don't have to code switch. We don't have to explain shit to start, and then
Absolutely not.
it's
Flows.
just it's burdensome. It's definitely burdensome. But segment three, how can I best support you? Right. So we talked about the international staff piece, international athlete development, as well as even considering international education and really prioritizing international education as a core priority for college athletics. But speaking directly to you and about you, how can I and our podcast community best support you in the work that you're doing?
I mean, you've done it from the beginning. This is not new to us. We've been doing this for 4 years. So now it's just about continuing educating, whether you know, you know, bypassing the people who are trying to silence it, bypassing the people who think it's an immigration issue, bypassing people who think it's a race issue, because we're way past those things. I think we're deeper than that right now. We're looking at cultural awareness and cultural understanding. And just keep doing what you're doing. You've been an advocate. You've been an ally. And very few people who who can publicly be an ally and advocate, and you've been one of those, and just continue doing that for the community. I think someone told me a couple of days ago that I'm making a difference within the international community. So you're definitely making a difference as well too. So just keep pushing the needle and pushing the forefront. It's funny seeing how grimmish and smirky folks get when they uncomfortable in uncomfortable spaces. I just love it now. Because it's now I'm doing something. Because if I'm in the room and you're uncomfortable, I've now made my presence and my point is being known. So for me, you've been an advocate, you've been an ally, and been a friend to the international community. And I'm just thank you for that, and thank you for being in the space, because you've allowed us, me, Dr. Ash, Raquel, a lot of us to tell our stories, and a lot of us to just be vocal about an unrepresented population within college athletics, and just continue doing the work. And I'm gonna continue walking with you.
You trying to close the podcast out?
No, not me, not me.
That's it. That was it, yo. Hey, look, it's all love, friend. It's all love. I'm glad we got you on. I'm very, very excited to drop this episode and some clips along the way to help people again. Just pull them along the way. I feel like it's a lot. It feels heavy right now.
Yeah,
it definitely feels like not because we don't know what we're doing, but we're trying to bring 20,000 plus and then their plus along. But I think once we cross the Red Sea, really.
Absolutely.
We all,
yeah, for sure. Because we're the visioners, the people who see the vision. But absolutely.
It's dope. But again, thank you, Ancia, for your presence, your point, and your purpose. I'm glad that you answered God's conference call, because the work that you're doing is definitely felt. And I support it and respect it 1,000%. But again, got a lot of ideas that we'll talk more offline about, because this is huge. But for everyone else, I'm glad y'all got to listen to one of our conversations. It's one of many that we'll continue to have on this podcast throughout this season, focused on international education, global sport, and Black culture. And today you got a mix of all three. Look forward to checking in with y'all next week as we continue to have these unfiltered conversations with authentic people. But as always, until then, walk with me. Peace.